11. Sophie Shambley. In June 2017, police officers in the Canary Islands received multiple reports about unsupervised children playing in the streets of Gran Canaria, while a strange woman wandered around with no clothes on. By the time authorities arrived, 30-year-old Sophie Shambley had already returned to her apartment in Patalavaca along the island's southern coast, but she was still naked. When discovered, she was laying in bed instead of tending to her family. The mother of two had recently moved to the island from Britain with her husband and children just 6 weeks earlier. Sophie's husband, Sean, told law enforcement that the couple had attended a wedding earlier that day, where he was the best man and Sophie was a bridesmaid. He said that Sophie went home early in the day to put their kids to sleep and that she must have fallen asleep herself at some point after that. According to Sean, everyone had had a few drinks by that point. Sophie was reportedly released on bail not long after speaking with the judge. 10. Nicole Norris. A young man from Oregon was so worried about his mother's driving one night in August 2017 that he decided to call 911 from inside the vehicle. And he wasn't the only person concerned, according to authorities, who later revealed that several other drivers on the road had called the police. Deputies from the Washington County Sheriff's Office eventually caught up with the driver, 30-year-old Nicole Norris, in Hillsborough around 9 o'clock in the evening while she was on her way home from a sporting event. During a breathalyzer test, she allegedly blew twice the legal limit for driving. Norris was immediately arrested for drunk driving, and at the time, law enforcement said she would possibly also have to face a child endangerment charge. The outcome of the case is currently unclear. 9. Tommy Powell. 32-year-old Amberly Harris was declared missing in December 2022. During the search for the woman, police visited her boyfriend, 55-year-old Tommy Powell, at his apartment in Independence, Kentucky. In body cam footage taken from the encounter, a detective was heard asking Tommy if Amberly was still there. Police were probably surprised when Powell calmly responded that Amberly was not at the apartment. In a shocking twist, the man admitted to fatally shooting the young woman. Officers quickly went inside the apartment and discovered Amberly's deceased body in a back room, where Powell had kept her remains hidden for 3 days while simply going about his daily life as if nothing had happened. After being arrested on suspicion of murder, Powell waived his Miranda rights and spoke with detectives. He confessed to killing Amberly with a 20-gauge shotgun after losing control during a heated argument. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of his lover. 8. Hugh Hoodman. On what started off as a normal day in December 2022, an elderly resident in Stuart, Florida, named Susan Hoodman kept the laundry room door in her apartment complex open. Susan's neighbor, 81-year-old Henry Wallace, apparently had an issue with this because he felt that it violated laundry room etiquette. Henry then lashed out at Susan, leaving her feeling understandably shaken and upset. A few days later, Susan's husband, 75-year-old Hugh Hoodman, saw Henry in the building and expressed his disapproval over how he'd handled the prior disagreement with his wife. Hugh demanded that Henry make an apology to Susan, but Henry ignored the order and instead tried walking away. According to a report, Hugh then pulled out a 9mm handgun and fatally shot Henry, whose wife, Ginger, rushed out of the couple's apartment after hearing the commotion outside. She was also shot twice and passed away from her injuries. After senselessly killing his neighbors, Hugh seemed to instantly regain his composure. He went to his apartment and calmly ordered his wife to call 911. But a mailman who witnessed the murders had already beaten him to it, and police soon rushed onto the scene. When responding deputies got there, Hugh admitted to shooting the Wallaces and said he simply lost his temper. He apologized and said he wished he could take his actions back. But unfortunately, he can't, and is now facing 2 charges for first-degree murder. 7. Ellen McMillian. Guests are supposed to be on their best behavior while attending Disney parks. Anything less than that can not only cause a visitor to get kicked out, they might not ever be welcomed back. A 53-year-old woman from Brandon, Florida named Ellen McMillian learned this the hard way in September 2019 when she was handed a lifetime ban for allegedly throwing a drunk tantrum at Disney World Orlando. The trouble reportedly started when McMillian asked a taxi driver for a cigarette during her visit to Disney's Hollywood Studios park. According to some reports, she slapped the driver after he said he didn't have any. A security guard witnessed the entire altercation and instantly called the police, claiming McMillian was posing a serious threat to other visitors. The taxi driver, Adele Mahmood, told Yahoo Lifestyle later on that McMillian was completely drunk, out of her mind, and had no control. An arrest report declared that McMillian grew belligerent when a responding officer asked her to settle down. The complaint also described the suspect having slurred speech, being unsteady on her feet, and having bloodshot eyes. McMillian allegedly admitted to being drunk multiple times and even demanded a cigarette from the cops, saying that she refused to speak with them until they catered to her absurd wishes. When an officer asked for her ID, she apparently threw her purse at him in a huff and said, "Here." Police also accused McMillian of kicking an officer 2 times while being taken into custody and cursing loudly in front of families with young children. She was charged with battery on a law enforcement officer and disorderly intoxication and was banned from every Disney park for life. 6. Sarah Nicole Morales. In 2021, a 35-year-old librarian from Florida named Sarah Nicole Morales was 5 months pregnant at the time when she rammed her car into a motorcycle after a road rage altercation in Orange City. The victim, Andrew Dare, and several other drivers followed her vehicle as she fled the scene to try and stop her from getting away with what she'd done. At one point, the Good Samaritans warned Morales against making a turn at an intersection and advised her to wait until police arrived. But she turned anyway, so the pursuit continued until Morales arrived at her home and walked inside. Dare and the other witnesses stayed outside the property and called 911. Meanwhile, Morales also called the police and said a few aggressive men were threatening her. She was still on the line with the dispatcher when she walked outside with a gun and ordered the witnesses to leave. Fearing for his life, Dare pulled out his own weapon and fired multiple shots at Morales. She was killed by her injuries, and her unborn child sadly didn't make it either. Dare was handcuffed at the scene and taken into custody, but cooperated with law enforcement. An investigation concluded that he acted in self-defense, and authorities declined to press further charges. 5. Cedric Lashon Smith. Late one night in March 2023, 2 men, 32-year-old Porfirio de Jesus Sampaio and 45-year-old Cedric Lashon Smith, got into a fight in the parking lot of a post office in Houston, Texas. It's unclear what the disagreement was actually about, but tensions between the men evolved into physical violence when Smith allegedly opened fire on Sampaio as he tried driving away. Smith's loss of control over his temper caused Sampaio to lose control over his vehicle and crash into a light pole as he was hit by the gunfire. Police arrived within 8 short minutes after the shooting and discovered Sampaio in his toppled truck with a fatal gunshot wound. By the time they got to the scene, Smith had already fled on his bicycle. The incident happened in a somewhat busy area, but it took some time for detectives to identify a suspect. In August, 5 months after the initial shooting, investigators charged Smith with Sampaio's murder while arresting him for an unrelated case. According to records, he's currently being held at the Harris County Jail while the outcome of the murder case is pending. 4. Yakobsik Talib. In 2022, former NFL cornerback Yakobsik Talib and his brother, 39-year-old Yakobsik Talib, were attending a youth football game in Lancaster, Texas, when a fight broke out between the coaching staffs of the 2 playing teams. The parties disagreed over a few calls that were made by officials, and tensions quickly escalated to the point where the game had to be cancelled. Shortly after this, Yakobsik Talib allegedly pulled out a semi-automatic handgun and shot the opposing team's coach, 43-year-old coach Michael Hickman. By the time responding officers found Hickman dead with gunshot wounds to his chest, back, and forearm, Talib had left the scene in his car. The suspect eventually turned himself in for the murder charge. Shortly after the shooting, Yakobsik Talib released a statement through his lawyer saying that he was devastated by the unfortunate loss of life. The suspect's attorney, Clark Birdsall, told the New York Times after Talib's arrest that he interviewed several witnesses. He said that he believed Hickman instigated the deadly disagreement. Birdsall also claimed that Talib acted in self-defense and in defense of bystanders, but the defendant changed his story in early 2023 when he pleaded guilty to the murder. As part of a plea agreement, he was sentenced to just 37 years in prison. According to records, Talib is set to be released in the year 2060, at the ripe old age of 77. Sadly, this incident highlights a worsening trend of adults resorting to violence to settle disputes over youth sports. Nothing good ever comes of it. People often get hurt, die, get arrested, and are traumatized. Yet these types of encounters are only becoming more frequent in recent years. 3. David Berry. When 44-year-old David Berry discovered a landscaping truck partially blocking the driveway at his Clearwater, Florida home one day in 2022, he became filled with rage. Surveillance footage shows that he still had enough room to back his truck out, but to Berry, it was unacceptable for the truck to be even slightly in his way. Instead of confronting the landscaper in a civilized fashion, Berry started screaming and yelling at the man, who was peacefully working in a yard nearby. According to witnesses and video evidence, Berry grabbed a semi-automatic from his truck and pointed it at the landscaper while threatening to shoot him. Florida's laws and culture are incredibly pro-gun, so the bystanders who witnessed the outburst likely weren't holding their breath in hopes that police would charge Berry with any crimes. But they actually did, and the man is now facing a felony charge of aggravated assault. His guns have also been taken away while the case works its way through the court system. In a statement, Clearwater Police Chief Dan Slaughter said that there's no reason for someone to arm themselves with a rifle and threaten another person over something so small. This shows that even in states people tend to be gung-ho about their gun rights, it's still possible to take things too far. 2. Egyptian cop loses control. On October 7, 2023, members from the Hamas extremist group made an attack on Israeli civilians at a concert near the Gaza border, sparking the currently ongoing Israel-Hamas war. The next day, an Egyptian police officer killed an Israeli couple at an archaeological site in Alexandria. According to the Israeli Foreign Ministry, the victims were visiting a well-known Roman site called Pompey's Pillar when the cop opened fire on their tour group, killing the couple as well as a third victim who also happened to be Egyptian. At least one other person survived with minor injuries. Two sources who claimed to have insider knowledge on this event told Reuters that the police officer lost control and unloaded his gun after being provoked by the tour group. Disturbing footage from the site showed the victims' bodies on the ground, while panicked onlookers cried in distress. It's unclear whether he specifically targeted the victims, but based on initial reports, the decision to shoot the couple seemed to be entirely random. Unfortunately, authorities have stayed tight-lipped about the situation, leaving the details somewhat unclear. It's also unknown whether the shooter's motive had something to do with the ongoing violence in Israel and Palestine, but it seems likely. The alleged gunman is in custody, while an investigation into the shooting and the circumstances leading up to it is conducted. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Dominique Thompson. In early 2023, an argument took place between 69-year-old Hobby Lobby supervisor Douglas Smith and his employee, 32-year-old Dominique Thompson, who worked at one of the store's locations in Oklahoma City. The ordeal started in Smith's office, and at some point Thompson went to his car, grabbed his gun, and returned to the office, where he opened fire on his supervisor. Just before 5 o'clock, police got a call about an active shooter inside the store. Officers quickly surrounded the building and went inside in search of a suspect. They discovered Smith dead, with gunshot wounds inside his office, and were informed by witnesses that Thompson fled the scene in his car. Several hours later, officers spotted Thompson's vehicle along a highway and tried to pull him over. At least 6 police agencies were involved in the ensuing high-speed pursuit, as it reached speeds over 100 miles per hour. The chase finally came to an end after Thompson lost control of his car and crashed in a field, causing his vehicle to roll several times. He was found dead inside the car, which means he'll never face justice under the law, but at least he no longer poses a threat to himself or others.
8. Alberto and Jus Salgado. In September 2022, police discovered a flaming truck in Merced, California. Around the same time, the family of the vehicle's owner, Amandeep Singh, reported him and 3 others missing. Singh had mysteriously vanished with his infant niece and the child's parents, Jasleen Powell and Jasdeep Singh. Surveillance footage from the family's trucking business showed an armed man forcing all 4 victims into a pickup while their hands were bound. The video also revealed that there were 2 possible suspects involved in the kidnapping. Nothing seemed to be stolen from the business, ruling out robbery as a motive, and detectives started investigating any possible grudges someone may have had against the family. Relatives of a disgruntled former employee, 48-year-old Jus Salgado, suspected his involvement and quickly called the police. By the time officers went to Salgado's home to question him, he had tried to take his own life. He was quickly rushed to the hospital and survived the attempt. A relative of the victims told authorities that Salgado was caught up in a long-standing feud with the family after they fired him. Shortly after his arrest, a farmhand discovered the victim's remains in a remote almond orchard, about 30 miles or 50 kilometers from where they first disappeared. Salgado now faces 4 counts of first-degree murder. His brother, Alberto, was later identified as the 2nd suspect in the surveillance footage and faces charges of conspiracy to commit robbery, accessory after the fact, and arson. Law enforcement declined to provide specifics on the nature of his involvement in the disturbing crime. 7. Gitche Manito Murders. One evening in 1973, Sandra Chesky, her boyfriend, 17-year-old Roger SM, and 3 of their friends, Michael Hadrath and brothers Dana and Stuart Badd, had an overnight camping trip at Iowa's Gitche Manito State Preserve. They were relaxing around a campfire when 3 men suddenly ambushed them, claiming to be narcotics officers. The terrified teens cooperated with the trio's commands and stayed still while Sandra was forced into a truck at gunpoint. They drove away, and the 2 suspects still at the scene killed the rest of the captives. Sandra endured hours of torture at the hands of her captor, who took her to an abandoned farmhouse to murder her. But she somehow talked him out of it. At first, law enforcement found it strange that Sandra escaped, and they suspected she might have been involved in the murders. They soon realized that she was truly traumatized, though, and shifted their focus elsewhere. Unfortunately, Sandra's classmates and other community members were less convinced of her innocence and harassed her throughout the investigation. After failing to identify the suspects, police drove all over the area in search of the farmhouse Sandra described, hoping it would help lead them to answers. They finally recognized it 10 days after the murders, as one of the suspects pulled into the driveway. Officers arrested him and later caught the other suspects, who were identified as brothers Alan James and David Fryer. On the night of the murders, David was serving jail time, but was out on a work release program. He called the facility pretending to be his boss and said he was staying for a double shift, then went to Gitche Manito with Alan and James. They were poaching deer before discovering the teens and deciding, for reasons that remain unclear, to carry out their disturbing crimes. All three Allen brothers were convicted of the murders and are now serving life sentences without parole. 6. Roni and Josue Castaneda Ramirez. When nobody recognized two young men at Joe Melgoza's wedding reception in Chino, California in 2019, the 30-year-old newlywed kicked them out. They returned toward the end of the night and confronted Melgoza in an alley outside. The wedding crashers then assaulted Melgoza and two of his guests with a bat. By the time police arrived, Melgoza and his attackers had disappeared. Officers found the victim in a backyard nearby, suffering from blunt force trauma to the head. He died from his injuries. And the suspects, brothers Roni and Josue Castaneda Ramirez, were handed murder charges. Melgoza's brother, Andy Velasquez, told the Washington Post that the night was going well when the brothers showed up. At first, the groom assumed someone must have invited them, even though he had no clue who they were. But it eventually became clear that nobody knew them, at which point they were told to leave. Law enforcement declined to elaborate on the crime's specifics, including how they found the suspects, the nature of the altercation before the attack, or a possible motive. The current status of the case is unclear as well. 5. Alan and Alex Stokes. Twin brothers, Alan and Alex Stokes, rose to social media fame for filming elaborate pranks and posting on YouTube. They run one of the world's most viewed YouTube channels and have over 30 million TikTok followers. In 2020, the pair recorded themselves trying to get into an Uber while wearing ski masks and black clothes. They also had duffel bags in their hands, as if they had just robbed a bank. Unaware that it was a prank, the driver wouldn't take them anywhere. In the meantime, witnesses called 911 under the impression that the twins had committed a robbery and were trying to carjack the Uber. Irvine police rushed to the scene with their guns drawn. They were kind enough to let the brothers off with a warning, but the pair live-streamed another fake bank robbery just a few hours later. Months passed before Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer decided to move forward with serious charges of falsely reporting an emergency and false imprisonment affected by violence, menace, fraud, or deceit. In a statement, Spitzer denounced the idea that the stunts were harmless pranks, and he accused Alan and Alex of senselessly putting law enforcement officers in danger in a twisted attempt to gain more popularity on the internet. The twins, who are now 26 years old, pled guilty to a reduced misdemeanor charge and were only given probation. They were ordered to stop making YouTube videos depicting criminal behavior and to perform 160 hours of community service each. 4. Michael and Patrick Poland. While driving in Arizona along Interstate 17 in 1977, two armored car guards, Russell Dempsey and Cecil Newkirk, were pulled over. Two men posing as police officers ordered them to open their truck. They complied, and the phony cops made off with a whopping $228,000 in cash. The couriers never returned, but also never sent out a distress call or tripped the van's siren. Investigators quickly ruled them out as suspects after learning that they had no financial problems or any other major issues in their lives. Their armored van was soon found in the middle of the desert with its radio on. The FBI appealed to the public for information, and several witnesses reported seeing the van during a traffic stop. The Arizona Department of Public Safety said that none of its officers pulled the vehicle over, confirming that the suspects were acting as cops. In the months after their disappearance, Dempsey and Newkirk's bodies were found in canvas bags 300 miles, 483 kilometers north in Lake Mead. A third canvas bag contained more evidence, including a few personal belongings, and a local business owner identified one of the suspects, Michael Poland, in a photo lineup of suspects. Investigators discovered that Michael had just bought a new motorcycle. and had trouble holding a steady job. He didn't have much money either. His brother Patrick just bought a new car too. Both of them had recently paid off all their debts, and there was no legal or logical explanation for the sudden spending splurge. The suspects' narratives quickly fell apart during questioning, and they were both eventually convicted of murdering Dempsey and Newkirk. They each received the death penalty. Michael was executed by lethal injection in 1999, and Patrick's execution happened 9 months later. 3. Rob, Dale, and Harry Rogers. Violent crime was practically unheard of in the small, close-knit town of Ladysmith, Wisconsin, so the community was shaken to the core when 27-year-old Rob Fale was found face down on the ground with a bullet wound in 1979. Someone had shot the well-liked college student in the head, execution style, while he walked home from his neighbor's house with a jug of milk in his hands. Investigators discovered that Fale was recently caught up in a dispute with local district attorney Bob Rogers. The two men knew each other, but their friendship turned sour when Rogers asked Fale to sell drugs for him. Fale refused, and Rogers couldn't take no for an answer. When Fale's dogs escaped their cages one day, Rogers ordered sheriff's deputies to shoot them, and they did. The victim then threatened to expose the DA's criminal dark side, and soon turned up dead. Authorities didn't have enough solid evidence to pin the murder on Rogers, who they believed hired someone else to do the job. The disgraced prosecutor moved to California and took his own life in 1984, after having involvement in another murder. At one point, the ex-wife of Rogers' brothers came forward and told detectives that the DA's 3 siblings had carried out the killing. But the information was inadmissible in court due to marital privilege, and the investigation stayed at a standstill. The case passed through the hands of several prosecutors before newly elected DA Kathleen Pakes gave it another look after the urging of Fale's father in 2000. 4 years later, 25 years after Fale's murder, Rogers' brother, Harry John Rogers, confessed to being the shooter. He implicated 2 other Rogers brothers, Dale and Mike, for their alleged roles in the crime as well. Harry said Rob had told them Fale was out to get him and persuaded them to kill the victim first. A jury convicted Harry of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to serve out life in prison with the possibility of parole. Dale pleaded guilty to solicitation of second-degree murder and served a little over a year. Authorities declined to press charges against Mike Rogers in exchange for his help against Harry and Dale. 2. Matt and Noah Colvin. During the days of panicked stockpiling of basic supplies in 2020's COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, 36-year-old Matt Colvin and his 21-year-old brother Noah bought thousands of bottles of hand sanitizer and antibacterial wipes to sell on Amazon at inflated prices. The price-gouging pair, who live near Chattanooga, Tennessee, spent thousands accumulating a stash of 17,700 bottles of hand sanitizer. But they weren't worried about the outlandish cost, since they were charging well over the price of what the supplies were going for on store shelves, and people were buying from them. The brothers made the mistake of sharing their business scheme with the New York Times, telling the news outlet that they had resold about 300 bottles of sanitizer at prices ranging somewhere between $7 and $70 each. As soon as the story broke out, Amazon pulled items that were being sold for outrageous prices, including the Colvin stock. In the meantime, the two received death threats and other hateful messages from angry consumers who felt like they were taken advantage of during a dangerous and scary time. A week after the brothers made headlines, then-President Donald Trump signed an executive order tasking the Justice Department with investigating COVID-related price gouging and hoarding. Tennessee state authorities arrested Matt and Noah, who were quick to cooperate once they realized they were in trouble. They avoided a price gouging fine and restitution by donating the remaining supplies. and they also agreed not to continue their business practices. The case was resolved quickly, and the sanitizer and wipes were given to the Colvins Church for distribution for use by first responders. 1. Orlando Romero and Christopher Self. For a 2-month period starting in October 1992, brothers Orlando Romero and Christopher Self carried out one of the most violent crime sprees in California history. Joined by at least 2 accomplices, the pair conducted carjackings, burglaries, robberies, assaults, and even murders in Riverside County. During a routine helicopter patrol one day, police saw the murdered remains of best friends Joey Mans and Timothy Kip Jones. Both victims were shot to death. 6 weeks later, a third victim, Jose Aragon, was found dead in his truck from gunshot wounds. A few days after that, an off-duty law enforcement officer named John Feltenberger was robbed, carjacked, and shot. He survived the attack. Law enforcement failed to connect Romero and Self's crimes and investigated each incident as its own, until more than a month into their campaign of terror. After Aragon's murder, investigators obtained ATM surveillance footage of a man using the deceased's debit card. They questioned the individual, Jose Munoz, who implicated the men as the prime suspects. Detectives also connected Munoz, Romero Self, and a fourth co-conspirator to the other crimes. Authorities charged Romero and Self with capital murder and more. Munoz, who had an extensive criminal history, testified against the siblings in exchange for 51 years to life for his role in the crime spree. Both Romero and Self were convicted of the murders and were given the death sentence. Romero died from COVID in 2020, and Self still remains on death row. Executions in California have been on hold since Governor Gavin Newsom imposed a moratorium on the death penalty in 2019. And only time will tell whether Self will languish in prison for the rest of his life or be put to death.
Would you rather take a criminal charge for losing your temper on someone who wronged you? Or would you stay on the side of caution and let the law handle the situation, even if it meant the person might not be found guilty of any wrongdoing or punished for their actions? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.